Do you remember Al Amescamp? He's the farmer from Dyersville, Iowa, who found himself at a crossroads, sitting on his tractor in the middle of the night, staring at a baseball field where corn was supposed to be. The movie Field of Dreams was over. The cast and crew had left, and Al was left with a choice: keep the field or plow it under and plant the corn that paid the bills. After 4 long hours of deliberation under the stars, Al made his decision. He plowed it under. And then the people came. Things ultimately worked out for Al and the field, but 13 years later, he wasn't so lucky. In June of 2001, 13 years after the making of Field of Dreams, Al Amescamp, 65 years old, lay in a Dubuque hospital, dying of cancer. He lay with his wife and no doubt family and friends. But as he stared up at the ceiling, with not much time left, of all the people in the world, Al Amescamp told his wife that he wished to speak with Kevin Costner. Former director of the Iowa Film Office, Wendell Jarvis, will take over from here.
One thing that I remember real clearly, after we'd filmed the movie, Al and Rita Amescamp, who owned the other side of the ball field and the land there. Rita called me up one night and told me that her husband Al was at the Dubuque hospital and he was dying. I mean, he didn't have hours or days to live. It was just, it was really a sad thing. And they wanted me to call Kevin to let him know, because Kevin had spent some time with Al and Rita during the filming. So I called Kevin's office. This is also something that a lot of people don't know. His company is called TIG Productions, TIG. He named it after his grandmother. So I called there, and Kevin was in somewhere overseas doing a film project. But I left the message that Al was in the hospital and he was dying, and they wanted me to get the message to Kevin. I got a phone call the next morning from Rita. Kevin had called the hospital at 3 a.m. to talk to Al. And he got to talk to him before he passed away. And what a remarkable thing for a human being to do. He didn't have to do that. Al Amescamp was one of hundreds of people that he worked with on that film, but he had the compassion to do that for this man. And that's something that I really admire about him. He's, in my eyes, just a great, great human being.
Hearing this story, I just think, what the hell kind of film was this? We have this field split between two farms. One farmer, Don Lansing, becomes a surrogate father for Dwyer Brown, who played the father, John Kinsella. The other farmer, Al Amescamp, develops a relationship with Kevin Costner to the point where Costner, from somewhere overseas, calls Al Amescamp on his deathbed in the middle of the night. Does this typically happen with actors and casts and crew on film shoots, where the manufactured story turns into a real one? I don't think so. Tonight, we'll take a closer look at this clash between fiction and reality, between spiritual and emotional when it comes to the field in Dyersville, Iowa. Sometimes the clash works, sometimes it doesn't. But either way, it often makes for a wonderful tale.
This book really should have never been written. The film should have never been made.
I sort of have this feeling that one of the reasons I was born, was to be part of this, to get this out into the culture.
what they didn't count on was the word of mouth, that people would see it and then just say, oh my God, you have to go see this movie. It ended up defying the odds.
Midnight Library of Baseball presents Season 2, The Making of Field of Dreams. From unlikely inception to enduring impact across generations. I'm Ben Orlando. On numerous occasions, I've mentioned the book written by Dwyer Brown, titled If You Build It, a book about fathers, fate, and Field of Dreams. This is a nonfiction book about Brown's life and experiences during and after the making of Field of Dreams. But Dwyer Brown did not set out to write a book of nonfiction. He originally set out to write a screenplay. More specifically, he set out to write the sequel to Field of Dreams. Unfortunately, as Brown tried his hardest to imagine this fantasy, time and again he ran into the harsh smack of reality.
When I started writing my book, I was actually going to write the sequel to Field of Dreams, because I've been fascinated by people's reaction of what is the cornfield and what happens. This person who said, oh, he died right when he went in the cornfield. And I'm like, oh, I didn't see it that way. The way I started out my sequel was that essentially baseball fields are connected by a hidden, time portal, and you could, leave Dyersville, Iowa field and pop up in, Staten Island, New York at a ball field. And so there was this mystical transportation circuit for ball players. That was sort of the fantasy that I went with. And then I tried something else and something else. And what I realized then was the movie Field of Dreams ends at just the perfect time. Here are the people driving in thoughtfully, an endless line of cars coming in. But if the camera had just rolled another 10 minutes, where do those people park? And she says, oh, I'm going to go get ready. Looks like we're going to have company. But, 1,500 cars, people are going to come. There's bleachers for, 15 people maybe. And, where are they parking? Do people get stuck in the mud when they're trying to leave? Like, I don't know. The logistics of it are mind boggling. Field of Dreams ends kind of in the perfect place.
It's funny listening to Dwyer Brown trying to write this sequel, this fiction. And here he's getting caught up trying to figure out the logistics. In a way, he may have allowed reality to intrude where it didn't need to. After all, you can make anything happen on the page. But for Al Amescamp and Don Lansing, the co-owners of the Field of Dreams field, there was only reality and trying to figure out logistics. And this cruel reality led to a decades-long feud. But also, it led to true love. If no one had come, if the film had ended, the cast and crew left, and things had returned to normal, that would have been that. But after the film wrapped up, as we know, Al Amescamp plowed under his part of the field, which was left in center field. But Don Lansing decided to leave his part of the field. Well, one day not long after the film had been released, a man set out on a cross-country trip, and one of his stops was the Field of Dreams. He was traveling from New York to San Francisco. He'd just seen the movie, and he wanted to stand on the field where it was shot. And when he arrived and stood there in the grass, the emotions welled up inside him. Don Lansing, looking out his farmhouse window and seeing a stranger standing on his lawn, didn't know what was happening. And when he walked outside to investigate, he found a grateful man who insisted that Don Lansing take the baseball cap given to this man by his father. This was just the beginning. Over the days and weeks, more and more people began to show up. And Don Lansing, who primarily worked at a John Deere factory, was gone all day. But when he came home, he'd find balls and bats and gloves on the field, strewn about, as if children had played a pickup game and their parents had called them in for dinner. And along with equipment, Don Lansing found money. $10 bills, $20 bills, $100 bills stuffed under rocks. As Terrence Mann said in the film, quote, "Of course, we don't mind if you look around, you'll say. It's only $20 per person." They'll pass over the money without even thinking about it, for it is money they have and peace they lack. End quote. Here's the thing. In the film, Mann was suggesting that Ray Kinsella would tell people it's $20 and then they'd hand it over. In reality, Don Lansing wasn't there. Nobody was there. People came to this field for free, and without anyone telling them or suggesting it, they decided to hand over money. Lots of money. In addition to the gloves, bats, balls, and money, people also left stories. Stories about their experiences and their lives. So moved, so desperate to connect and share, that they wrote on whatever they could find and left their messages for Don Lansing. Eventually, there was so much money left scattered around the field that Don Lansing put up an old mailbox and wrote donations on it. He also put out a notebook so people could properly and more easily share their stories. From Dwyer Brown.
If you go to the Field of Dreams movie site, The House, there is a whole wall of notebooks filled with people's stories who came there. I mean, there's guest book. I mean, literally a whole wall filling thousands of these books with just people scribbling, "Keep up the work," or "My dad died and I sprinkled his ashes here," or "When can we get married?" Or, all these things, because people are so attached to that movie.
It's funny, when Dwyer Brown was trying to continue the ending, he hit a logistical roadblock. But here in real life is the continuation of what would happen. People came and filled up their souls and left treasured objects or written memories or cash. But it was the cash that changed things, as is often the case. If you like the show and crave more content, you can become a Patreon member, where you'll have access to additional audio episodes, video interviews, and other articles and images linked to the show. Go to Patreon/Midnight Library of Baseball. And since this is a one-man production, every bit of support helps. You can donate at midnightlibraryofbaseball.com, and you can add reviews on iTunes and Spotify. Okay, back to the show. From Dwyer Brown.
Don eventually opened a little souvenir stand because, like I said, he recognized that people wanted to do stuff. So he had a little souvenir stand. And then Al opened a little souvenir stand on his side. There's these two driveways that are parallel, 5 feet apart, going to two different farms. And one was called Field of Dreams Left and Center. And the other one was, Field of Dreams Movie Side. And anyway, Don said, "Hey, Al, why don't we just have one concession stand and, I'll give you a third of it since a third of the field's on your property." Well, Al Amescamp wanted 50% of the field. And so that just started this kind of feud where they both had to have their own concession stands. And then tours came and the ghost players. And I mean, there was this fight. And again, in the movie, everything's great. They pay off the farm. In reality, two farmers couldn't even agree enough to allow for one stand.
You might think this constant feuding would disrupt the flow of visitors. It did not. All that most visitors wanted was a chance to step onto some part of the field so they could connect with the magic and history of baseball. But really, it was so that they could connect with whatever was deepest and dearest to them. In his book, Is This Heaven? The Magic of the Field of Dreams, author Brett Mandel wrote all about what happened to the field in Dyersville after the film. Quote, "The field has hosted the first meeting of long-separated fathers and sons, and countless family reunions. It has seen proposals and marriages. Some visitors return annually to renew their vows, and the field has reportedly been sprinkled with the ashes of a former Major League ball player, spread lovingly by his son." End quote. In a country and culture where people were not allowed to stop, where the words fast and constant were the two leading adjectives in their lives, the field in Dyersville gave people permission to stop, to slow down, to feel. It's so incredibly simple, but they needed to come to this field in the middle of nowhere to receive permission and forgiveness and absolution. And for this seemingly simple gift, the gratitude people experienced was boundless. Over the years, a few hundred visitors turned into tens of thousands. In 2019, more than 130,000 people visited the field. For two farmers who knew nothing about running a theme park, they had to learn on the fly. As Brett Mandel wrote, quote, "The tenders of the Field of Dreams struggled with an appropriate way to acknowledge the pilgrimage, provide hospitality to the visitors, and maintain their privacy and sanity." End quote. And as the Lansings and Ames camps were devoting more and more time to the pilgrims, they also had to figure out how to make a living from the Field of Dreams. Again, according to Mandel, quote, "Had they paused each time to ask all the questions lawyers would ask, they never would have undertaken their unique responsibilities." End quote. For instance, to pay for upkeep of the grounds, both Lansing and Ames Camp opened souvenir stands that grew larger and more packed with memorabilia each season, including dirt. Al and Rita Ames Camp collected buckets of dirt from the field, which they then poured into small plastic vials. They glued labels on the vials with the Dream Dirt logo and an affidavit that read, quote, "This certifies that Dream Dirt is from the original left and center field of dreams." End quote. They gave these vials to anyone who wanted them, after a small donation. And many people wanted them. Perhaps some of you listening to this right now have one of these vials of dirt in your house. According to Mandel, one man ordered hundreds of vials and passed them out as favors at his wedding. And Don Lansing, not one to miss out on the action, separated and cleaned the pickets from the fence used in Field of Dreams and offered these to visitors as keepsakes. The film itself has generated hundreds of millions of dollars at the box office and in rentals over the years, and the field in Dyersville no doubt has brought in millions more. Since those early days of putting out coffee cans and old mailboxes for donations, the Ames camps and Lansings introduced liability insurance, along with product licensing. According to Mandel, quote, "The Field of Dreams experience soon included promotional brochures, souvenir stands, and to accommodate demand, guides for the many tour buses that visit the site." End quote. But with all these considerations and promotions and products, the field itself remained amazingly pure, and, as James Earl Jones once described it, a sanctuary. In the book Shoeless Joe, W.P. Kinsella interpreted baseball as a religion and the field a sacred temple. And in a 2023 Gallup poll, 47% of Americans identified as religious, while 33% identified as spiritual but not religious. That's 80% of the population. So it makes sense that many, many people would be drawn to this temple of grass and dirt, with such strong folklore behind it. And over the years, this field that represented something in a film became its own symbol. As Mandel explained, second-generation visitors returned to the field because their parents or grandparents loved the field. For many of these younger people, it was no longer about the book or the movie. It was solely about the field. And of course, when you're talking about the religious, the spiritual, you have to talk about the miraculous. Tyler Measom is a writer and director who's produced more than a dozen documentaries, including the Netflix hit Murder Among the Mormons. He also hosts the popular podcast Was I in a Cult?
Hello, Ben.
Hi, Tyler.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
Nice to meet you. Nice to hear
Yeah.
your voice.
Yeah, you too.
Since I've been listening to it for the last 2 weeks.
Great. I'm so happy to talk with you.
I'm in my recording studio. Are we going to record? Are we?
Tyler
Yeah,
Measom
I'm
reached out to me because of his love of baseball and the story he really wanted to share.
I've always loved the game of baseball. And I remember when I was a child, I was named after Ty Cobb, oddly enough. And so I've always had this baseball love and heritage. And my father loved the game. My mother loved the game. And I vividly remember quite literally falling in love with the game of baseball, having that tingly sense in my stomach when I was reading about the history of the game.
Can you tell me about your experience with Field of Dreams?
Sure. Not too long ago, I happened to be shooting on a farm in Monticello, Iowa. And before I went, I looked at Monticello, Iowa, and I went, oh my God, it's only 30 minutes away from Dyersville, Field of Dreams. And I have a friend who's my best friend and a lover of baseball, and he's a filmmaker. He shoots. And I hired him because I knew specifically that he and I were going to go to the Field of Dreams. So I was shooting during this day, and it was lunch time, and I said, I got to go run and do something. And of course, I'm the director. I could do that. But we beelined straight for the Field of Dreams. Not telling anyone, we were obviously playing hooky from the shoot to go see the Field of Dreams. But how could I not? When am I going to be in Iowa that close to the Field of Dreams? So we get there, and it was a beautiful day. It was this beautiful fall day, crisp. The corn was close to being harvested, and it was just blue skies, perfect temperature. It was delightful. We got out of the car and we walked towards the field. We had a catch and we chatted. And then we went up and went to the plate, and he pitched me some balls and I hit, and I played high school ball. I was okay. And I hit a few. I got one just almost hit the corn. And then I saw this old timer walk up, this old man, and he was hobbling to get there. And he was there with his son. And I started up a conversation with him. And this guy was in his 80s. And his son said, we drove here from Texas. We drove all the way here from Texas. And we wanted to take a road trip together and get to know each other. And one of the spots we wanted to spend was here at the Field of Dreams. And so he saw us hitting, and he goes, can I take a few swings? And I said, sure. And I got on the mound, and he didn't get around that well. And he just hunched over this bat. And I just lollipopped a pitch in, and he turns and he whacks it. He hits it pretty hard. And I throw another lollipop in there, and he turns and whacks it. So I get a little bit faster, and I come in just a little harder with my pitches. And he hits them, and he hits them, and he just keeps hitting them. And then I brushed him back because he was crowding the plate naturally. No, I didn't do that, of course. I saw this 80-year-old man turn into a 15-year-old. The joy I saw on his face. And his son said, oh, he used to play a lot of baseball. He was very good in his youth. And I could tell because he was hitting ropes. If I would have seen that old man walking down the street I would have said there's no way he could have picked up a bat.
It sounds like a religious experience.
And I'm not a religious man. I don't believe in that stuff, but I do believe in the strange kismet of the fact that I was chosen to do a film that was but 20 minutes away from the Field of Dreams.
Yeah.
As I was throwing to him, he became a younger man. He was so happy. He was so happy to be there hitting balls. And I threw him one and he hit it and he just goes, "I'm having so much fun." And I just saw that was everything to this old man that had driven 20 plus hours to come to this stupid piece of grass in a cornfield. For him to pick up a bat and hit a few balls made his day, possibly his week. And so I saw a bit of the ghosts of the field. It was heaven out there.
Speaking of miracles, what happened in 1994 to Don Lansing and Becky Debuson might be considered fate, or as Tyler Measom explained, kismet. But one thing is certain, the fateful meeting between these two would never have happened without the Field of Dreams in Dyersville, Iowa. In 1994, in a bed in Colorado, Becky Debuson woke from a dream. In this dream, Becky was standing on the Field of Dreams in Iowa on New Year's Eve, and she was eating a hot dog and drinking root beer. 3 years earlier, Becky's husband died. He was a huge Red Sox fan, and the two had watched Field of Dreams many times. Fueled by her actual dream, Becky and her aunt traveled to Dyersville in late December 1994, and from there she called up Don Lansing and asked for permission to carry out her dream. Again, it was New Year's Eve in Iowa. Several inches of snow covered the field. It was freezing. Naturally, Don Lansing was reluctant, but after some convincing, he gave in and stared out his farmhouse window as Becky Debuson consumed a hot dog and root beer purchased from a Dairy Queen as she ran around the snow-covered bases. From Brett Mandel. Quote, "The next day, Becky and her aunt returned to thank Lansing for his hospitality. Lansing, curious about his visitors, played at clearing snow from his walk to size up the women who strolled up the path to his house. 'I want to thank you,' Becky said. 'I've been waiting for you,' Lansing responded, knowing his midnight visitors would come back. Lansing invited his guest in for coffee, and the group spent hours talking. Days later, Becky returned to continue the conversation. She left a snow angel as a farewell note. Becky and Don developed a friendship. The 41-year-old widow and the 52-year-old lifelong bachelor remained in contact. In July 1995, while Becky and Don walked around the field talking about the future, Lansing stopped at first base and proposed." End quote. The two married the next year, maybe not all because of, but largely because of, this field. For Becky Debuson and thousands of others, it may seem like a Herculean feat to summon the strength and will to visit this little ball field in the middle of nowhere. But for many, like Jerry Ryan, who got married on the field, it wasn't hard at all. Of this decision, Ryan said, quote, "It was just like all of a sudden you realize that you have to go down to the store to get some milk. I just realized that, for me, this next step of my life, this next stage of my life, I needed to go to the Field of Dreams. That's where I needed to go. It was very simple." End quote. The field has meant so many things to so many people, And in the end, it has nothing to do with the color of your skin, the language you speak, or the country you're from. From the head of the Iowa Film Office at the time, Wendell Jarvis.
Yeah, I remember right after the film was released, I went up there to Dyersville. And that day that I went out there, we had people from 3 different countries and many states all playing baseball together, people that had never met each other. And it was just a wonderful experience to see people working together and experiencing that from different cultures, from different countries, and they were just all loving it, and it was a great experience.
The field, like an old friend, leaves an impression, months, years, even decades later. This was the case with Academy Award-winning sound engineer Russell Williams.
To be out there with the USC coaches, Ron Dito and then Don Buford, who came back to help coach the players, and I got to throw some balls with them, and he said, "No, take those 2 steps when you're out in the outfield to get that motion." I mean, all of that stuff. It was really just, I mean, almost well, I won't say almost, it was a spiritual experience. I think the only thing I can't believe is that I have not gone back to Dyersville to the field. But every year I think about, well, maybe I should just get on a plane and go back and stand on that field again, because it really, something happened there,
Yeah.
something that you all feel from the screen, but I'm sure the connection I would feel being back there would be something that I would just go back to Iowa to say thank you.
For W.P. Kinsella biographer Willie Steele, returning to the field in Dyersville was a representation of all the unlikely, magical confluences that led him to this place at this time.
I remember sitting with my youngest daughter and Bill Kinsella's oldest daughter and her husband at the first Field of Dreams game, the Yankees-White Sox. And we're 10 rows back from home plate. And I'm just kind of like, how did I get here? And I realized I'm so fortunate to Bill Kinsella, because had he not written that book, then Phil Robinson, to whom I also owe a debt of gratitude, and to Larry Kesnick and to Dwyer Brown, it's this sort of progression to where here we are talking today about a book that was written, 40 plus years ago.
Isn't that amazing?
It's terrific. And it is something that came out of a Kinsella story. So, Kinsella was not a Yankees fan. My daughter turned to me and she goes, "Dad," she said, I can't cheer for the Yankees." And Shannon Kinsella kind of laughed and said, "Marianne, my dad didn't like the Yankees either. So what if we all cheer for the White Sox tonight?" And we all, okay, so we're for the night, we're all White Sox fans. And the Yankees are up by 1 going into the bottom of the 9th inning. And this is the only time where I've ever done this, Ben, where I've ever called a home run. I said, my daughter goes, "Dad, are they going to lose?" I said, "No, listen, all they need is a guy to get on first base, get a guy on base, and then somebody hits a home run." Guy gets on first base. Tim Anderson steps up. As soon as that ball jumped off the bat, it was like a bomb went off. The explosion of sound.
Anderson hits it in the air to right. Back at the wall, and the White Sox win it.
And the ball's going over. It lands out of the cornfield, and they're playing the Field of Dreams music, and there's fireworks. And I look at Shannon, and Shannon is starting to cry, and now I'm getting teary-eyed, and I'm like, this is perfect. And there was somebody who came and told Shannon, said, "You're this is like something your dad would have written."
Yeah.
And that just like really hit everybody in the road. It was like, it really is. Like, it would have been great had he been there to share in that.
We'll end tonight with a listener baseball story. Tonight's story comes from Patricia of Colorado. Baseball for Patricia was a beacon of light and connection during a time in her life when the darkness seemed insurmountable.
So I was actually pretty sick as a kid, and especially in the summers when I lived at home in New Jersey. And so I had an older brother, 2 years older, and he was a baseball nut. And when he wasn't out playing baseball all summer, he would be in our den watching the Yankees on WPIX. And so I was lying there on the couch, right, and watching it with him. Initially, what do I care about baseball? But it was lonely. I was often just by myself. You're hearing all the kids playing outside. So the fact that he was sitting with me, and then he was very patient with all my questions. What's an RBI and what's an ERA? And now, of course, the Yankees were rocking in those days. So Mickey Mantle, Whitey Ford, Bobby Richardson, Joe Pepitone. These were really great players. And then I had an aunt who was the secretary to the president of the Yankees. And so she got us into the club and these fabulous box seats. And we actually used to dress up to go to a game, because again, we'd go to the club and we would tend to go on bat day or ball day or something like this. And in the club, right, we'd have lunch. The players, you'd actually get to see them. So that was a very big deal. But college, and then you'd come home in the summers, you'd have to work. And somehow I think it dropped out. And I really didn't care much about baseball until I had kids, and especially until I had a son. And of course, he is a Yankee fan. And now he has a son who's not only a big Yankee fan, but himself is a baseball player. He's only 7, but it really is a connection that goes through the generations. Through my connection to my brother, and because I had been pretty isolated as a kid because of this illness, I was left alone in my room a lot, or even times in the hospital, and I had to be in an oxygen tent, which is really isolating. And so it meant a lot to me that my brother just was hanging out with me. And he probably didn't even care. I was very secondary to him, probably. He was really into the game. But again, the fact that he was very patient, he never got, frustrated with my questions. I remember saying, why are they always like patting each other on the rear end? I remember that. But my brother and I weren't that directly interacting. We were both watching this third thing. And those memories are very deeply embedded. There's some neurobiological thing it does to have someone side by side and you're both looking at or focusing on something else. I went on a trip I had long wanted to do on a ferry in Norway. From Bergen, you go through all the fjords, all the way up to Kirkenes, which is on the Russian border. It's in the Arctic Circle. So it takes you a week to do this whole trip. And little did I know, I'd never been on a boat before, that they assign you a table for dinner, and I had to sit alone for dinner every night. It was horrible. And I have very few memories of this trip because I didn't have anyone to share it with. My brother sitting with me and watching the Yankees meant a lot to me, that emotional connection. And I remember writing him a note maybe 10 years ago or something when I was thinking about this, because I guess I hadn't thought about it in a long time. And to let him know that, how important that was to me. Watching a game and just being with me.
Thank you, Patricia, for sharing what baseball has meant to you. In episode 14, our final episode, with the help of Cooperstown historian Tim Wiles, I'll explore a real-life story of a farmer who transplanted a Major League stadium to his farm years before Shoeless Joe, and perhaps in some way offered inspiration to W.P. Kinsella for the story that would eventually become Field of Dreams. I'll also reflect on my journey and what baseball has meant to me in my life. Next time, on the Midnight Library of Baseball presents The Making of Field of Dreams. The show is produced and edited by me, Ben Orlando. Music by Sergei Papkin and Ashot Danielyan. Good night.